Hi, this is Brent, and today I wanted to go over the next group of tutorials that we'll do in this series. So here I am at the Develop in Swift tutorials, and if you remember, there's a handful of items that are here on the left. Um, since I started this series a few weeks ago, they've added more content. So we have this app design, we have an app development, and we also have an app distribution. The app design, you can take a look and go through yourself. A lot of these are things that you would just do by way of taking notes and writing things down. There's not really any code to go over. So I'm going to skip the app design section since you'll be able to kind of do that on your own. The app development section does cover building an app from start to finish. And so I do want to cover that. So in this video today, I'm going to do this app development, views and data storage, and collect, model, and store data. In this one, there is a download file that we want to get. This has some image assets that'll be used. Again, this specific tutorial will start building an app, and then there will be a few more tutorials to finish everything up in the app. So go ahead and download those files, and then let's get started. Once you have the files downloaded, you can unzip them, and what you'll notice is they're just 3 images. So let's start Xcode, and let's create a new project. We'll create an iOS app, choose next, and we'll call this Grateful Moments. And then we're just doing SwiftUI. We're not doing any other things at the moment. So go ahead and choose next, and then save that. Then from here, what we want to do is open the assets folder, the assets group, and then take the files that we downloaded and grab these 3. So I'm holding down the Shift key, selecting all 3. I'm going to click and then drag and then let go right here, and it's going to add them to our assets group. Let's go ahead and add some colors. And the first thing we want to do is come down here and click the plus button and click color set. And then for the name, we're going to call this Ember, as in the color Ember. Then here we need to see the sidebar, so go ahead and click Show Sidebar button up here at the top. And for the appearance, we're going to set this to none. That way we have this color shows up in all instances, whether you have dark mode or light mode, but this color is available. Then we go ahead and select the swatch, this little block. And then down here, we need to set the color. And if you've been doing some of the other tutorials, we've used display P3, but we've had a different type of color where, we had floating points. So we had multiple values for red, green, and blue. But here, if you click on Input Method, we want the 8-bit hexadecimal. And this way we can enter the hexadecimal value, and the value is FE7D00. If you're familiar with hexadecimal values with color, it refers to the RGB, red, green, and blue value. So the R value is FE, and then the green is 7D, and then the 00 is the blue value. Hexadecimal are very common. You can search, when you look up color wheels and color schemes, a lot of times the hex value is what's provided. Because it's used in web development, it's something that you'll become familiar with a lot. So if you look up the hex value for a given color, or you find something, a shade of a color that you like, you can find that hex value very, very common. So we'll press enter or return, and then it should show up. So now we have that color. So let's add a couple more, 3 more colors to be exact. So go down and press the plus, say color set, We're going to call this one ocean. And then we select these up here. We're going to say appearance is none. And then it's selected. And then for the hex value, we want 00707D. Press return, enter. And then we add another color. And this one we're going to call Ruby. And change the appearance to none. Select the block. Change the hex value. And it's going to be D2262F. Press return. And then one more color. And this one's going to be called Sapphire. Select appearance none. Select the block, and the hex value is 153969. All right, so those are our 3 colors that we've just added. So now we have 4 custom colors that we've created. Let's take the ember color, and if you click the block and then you just click the block and then you press Command C to copy, and then click the accent color and then press Control V. That's going to paste that color. Wait, sorry. Back up. Let me delete that. Select the block and then press Command V, sorry. Command V to paste the color. So what we've done is we've copied the ember color, we've made it our accent color. You remember the accent color is used in the application as the tint. So the default tint color, when you have elements, buttons, background, various things, the tint is the accent color. So that's what we're doing. We're establishing kind of the base color for the application. Let's go over to our file explorer here on the left. We can minimize the sidebar, so give ourselves some more space. Come back over here. We're going to click on the Grateful Moments folder. Then we're going to right click and we're going to say New Folder. We're going to organize this, and over the next few videos we will add more files. So for now, just write the following. So we have custom views and press return. Then I click on the right click on Grateful Moments folder, say New Folder, and we'll call this one Logic. Create another folder, call this one Models. And then another folder, and we'll call this Tabs. Inside the Tabs folder, we want to right click and add another folder called Achievements. And then right click on the Tabs folder again and say New Folder and have it called Moments. So again, we're setting this up so it's going to contain, each of these folders will contain information, the files that we create within the application. Let's go ahead and add a file in, right click in the Moments folder, right click and say New File from Template, and we want a SwiftUI file, and we want to call this Moment Entry View. Go and click Return. Inside the body, we're going to remove this text. If we're going to use a variable as to reference code that's going to be outside of this. So this will make sense once we get through it, but just go ahead and we're going to create a variable called content stack. And then outside of the struct, outside of the body closure, we want to create a var content stack, and it's going to be some view, and then we have opening curly brace, and then from here we want to have a VStack, and the VStack alignment is going to be dot leading. And then remember, if you press tab and we go to the content, if you press return, then it gives us the closure, and now we can type our code. And here we want to say text title and then text note. And then we can give ourselves some padding on the VStack. So what we're doing is, instead of in the body having this variable, having all of this, the VStack and everything defined, what we're doing is we're creating this as a separate component that we can update internally. And then when we add more around the content stack, it's easier to manipulate instead of having this long, like this, we're going to add a lot more stuff. And so what we're doing is we're simplifying the management of the views within our screen. Now, you could put the content stack in its own file, but we're only using this in the moment entry view. And so for that reason, we're just going to keep it here in the same file. But this will make sense as we go along, because as we add more code, it'll be easier to, embed the content stack in various things as we go. So we will go ahead and right click on the content stack and choose embed. And here we're going to use a scroll view. And then for the scroll view, we want to add a modifier that says scroll dismisses keyboard and put dot interactively. So as we add more content, as the user is able to scroll, when they're entering text and they go to scroll, it will dismiss the keyboard automatically. Next, let's go ahead and wrap the scroll view and embed that in the navigation stack. And under the scroll view, we want the .navigation title, and we're going to say grateful for. Each of these will have a title and a note when you create an entry, as the application is allowing the user to record what they're grateful for. So for our purposes, we need a title, so we're going to use the state variable up here at the top, and so we say @state and private var. This will be title, and we're going to set it to default as an empty string. And then in our VStack, we want to update this so that under the text, let's go ahead and delete that and then give ourselves a text field. And the text is going to be bound to the title variable that we just created. And then, so you noticed I tabbed and then press return, and so now I have our code for the label. So we say text, title, and then parentheses required. So notice here, then it created a text view, and then it has the label, which is the hint text, or the suggested text, so they understand what to put. And then it's going to be title required. And then let's give some styling. Let's say .font, and we want it to be .title, .bold. And then for padding, we want to say padding .top, 48. So it gives ourselves some padding. Okay, we're getting an error because actually what happened is I didn't put its title.bold with the parentheses. There we go. And then after the title, let's give ourselves a divider. So we'll say divider right there. Next, we'll go ahead and do similar for the note, where we have a state variable. State private var note equals an empty string. And then here, for the note, we're going to use a text field. And it's going to say log your small wins. And then the text is going to be bound to the note. And then axis is going to be .vertical. And then here we want to set some modifiers. We're going to say multi-line text alignment .leading. And then here we're going to say dot line limit from, we want a minimum of 5, and then they can go up to as many as they want. So basically we're assigning a line limit so that as we add more content around this, the note will show 5 lines, but the user can enter more than 5 lines, because int.max means they can enter as much as they want. We want to be able to allow the user to select an image, and to do that we need to import the import PhotosUI, which is the framework that allows you to access the photo library and bring in images into your application. Let's create another variable, and we're going to put it here below the body, and we're going to say private var photo picker, and this is going to be a computed value that returns, it gives us an image and things that they can click on. So we're going to say photo picker, and it's going to return some view, and then the opening curly brace, and then we're going to return an image, and we're going to say system name. So we're going to use an SF symbol, and it's going to be photo.badge.plus.fill. And then we're going to do some modifiers. Let me go ahead, and before we do the modifiers, go ahead and at the bottom under your text field, let's go ahead and add the photo picker. So we're going to see this in the view, the preview window here. We see this little image, and as we add our modifiers, you'll see how it affects what we're presenting. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to set it larger. So we're going to say font and then dot large title. Then we're going to set a frame and set the height to 250. And then we want to set the frame, the max width to dot infinity. And what that does is we set it the height to 250, and so that's how tall it will be. But when we set the max width to infinity, that means it'll go the width of the screen. Then we want to say dot background and set a color white, and then 0.4, and then the opacity we'll say 0.32. So basically we've created a gray color. And then finally we want to say dot clip shape, and we're going to use a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 16. So notice how it's got that rounded corners for us. In order for this image to be used as a button, so that when they click the button, then it will open the photo picker, we want to wrap, right click on the image and choose embed, and wrap this in a photos picker, and the selection will be a new image. So we need to create a variable up here called @state private var new image, and it's going to be a photos picker item, and then set it as optional where we use the question mark. So here we create new image, and so now when they select an image, it will be assigned to the new image variable. When the user clicks on the image, we want to react to it, so we're going to say on change, and then say of new image. So when new image gets updated, meaning they've clicked a button and they've selected an image, and once that's happened, then We trigger the onChange because we know that the new image has been updated. We're going to set, first we're going to say guard let new image else return. What this means is this onChange should happen when a new image is selected. If for some reason that fails, then the guard let will protect it so that it doesn't crash, but instead it'll just return. So if there's no actual image to work with, then it'll just return without crashing. One other thing to note, notice how the image icon changed to the color, the tint, that accent color that we had selected. So remember, the button assumes the default tint for the application, and in our case it happens to be this ember color. When we get the information from the photos, we will receive a data property, and so we need to reference that. So we're going to say @state private var image data, and it'll be of type data. And again, we use a question mark because it's optional, so that one, it won't crash, and two, we don't have to have a variable assigned when the app runs. So here, following, if all is good and we have a new image, then we need to reference it as image data in order to access that within our image locally. We next need to assign that image data based on an asynchronous task. So we type task and then curly brace, and then we say image data equals, and we say try await new image dot load transferable, and the item is going to be type, it's going to be data dot self. So what happens is the photo picker will load and the image is selected from the user's library, and then we transfer that image from the library into our application. And we pass in the data object, and then the new image becomes the data. It converts the data that's transferred. Let's go ahead, and the next step, in order to load this image, we want to embed the image in a group. And instead of right-clicking and saying embed, what we're doing, just follow along here. So we're saying group, and then after the background, press return and do the closing curly brace. And then we're moving this so that the clip shape applies to everything that's inside this image. So the clip shape still applies, but what's happening is we're going to replace the image with the image data. And so in order for this to maintain the clip shape of the image that gets replaced, we're wrapping this in a group. Inside the group, we want to say if let image data, comma, let UI image equal UI image, and then data, which is image data. And here we're going to say image UI image, and then tab, so then UI image. And we'll give this some properties. We'll say resizable and dot scaled to fit. What we're doing is we put an else, we're going to say if else. So the way this works, if we have image data up here, so if we've got some image data, then we're going to create a UI image, pass in the image data, and from the UI image value, we pass that into the image class, and then here it's going to load the image in place. So you can see this in action if you click on the image and then you select it, and then notice it loads that image in. So we can see that this is working. If we don't have image data, then we're going to show the placeholder image like that. The other reason we use the group to wrap it around the image is because we have this if-else statement, this block, and in order to use an if-else block within the SwiftUI, we have to wrap it in a group. Next, we want to create the data model that's going to represent these items, and we're going to be able to save them using SwiftData in our application. So here on the left under the models folders, go ahead and right click and say new file from template, and we're going to call this a Swift file, and we will choose next, and we're going to call it moment. For the moment, in the moment class, we're going to say class moment, and then we're going to have some properties. We're going to say a title, var title, which is a string, var note, which is a string, and then var image data, which is a data object, and make it optional, and then var timestamp as a date. And we'll use timestamp in another video, but we're going to go ahead and create that. Now remember, when you create a class, you have to have an initializer function. And the reason we're using a class is so that we can use this as our model for saving data in the SwiftData container that's saved locally on your device. Next, let's import Swift data so that we can reference that, and then we're going to use the macro at model, and then we need to create our initializer function, init, and go ahead and use the autocomplete. And then the only thing we're doing here is on the date, we do want to set a default value to .now. So here we're passing in the strings, the image data, and then we want to set date as a default value as well. And then it automatically adds everything. Next, we want to import UI kit. And the reason for that is we want to modify the image so that when we go to get the data, it converts the image data into a UI image so that we can load that into the image SwiftUI easily. So underneath the init function, go ahead and create a var image and set it to type UI image, and then a question mark because it could be optional. And then we're going to compute, we're going to say image data dot flat map, and then inside that we're going to say UI image and pass in the data, and then we're going to use a reference to the #0. And so flat map will initialize the UI image. If there's data, the tutorial references when the data is non-optional. So that means when the data exists, it's going to apply, it's going to update and create and return an image, UI image from this flat map, so that does the conversion for us. We want to now create some sample data, and the way to do that here is we're going to create an extension, and inside, so we're going to say extension moment, and we're going to have some static variables. So we're going to say static let sample equal sample data, and then it'll be the first entry. And we'll create the sample data here in a second, so don't worry. We're going to go static let long text example equals sample data item number 1, which is the second item, and then static let image sample equals sample data item 4. Now let's create the sample data. So we're going to say static let sample data equals, and then it's going to be an array. And inside the array, we're going to create a bunch of samples. Now, I'm going to go ahead and copy this from the tutorial because there's quite a bit here. And it's easier to just copy and then paste inside there. And again, if you select all of the text and press Control I, it will re-indent that. So what we've done, let's spell the names right, sample data. So what we've done is we've created some static variables so that in our previews we can reference these examples. Here you've got a moment that has a title and then some notes, and then the second one has a long note, so you can see how that works. And then each of these, some have data and some don't. And so you see how that works. So this is, again, we're setting this up for future parts of the video where we will reference some sample data. In our logic folder, right-click on the logic folder and say New File from Template, and a Swift file, choose Next, and we're going to call this Data Container. And here we're going to import Swift data, and then we're going to have a class called Data Container, and we're going to say let model container and make that a model container object. And then we're going to set a context, var context model context, and that's going to be the model container dot main context. And then we need to create an init function. We'll fill that here in a second. But for now, what we're doing is setting ourselves up to create our SwiftData container. From the tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this again because this is fairly boilerplate code. We've looked at this in previous videos, so it should be familiar, but let's talk about this for a second. Again, we press Control I. So here we're creating a schema which represents the model class. The class we're saving is the moment object. And then we create a model configuration, and it's stored in memory is true. And then we create the container, we attempt to save it, and then we catch if there's an error. So again, this allows us to create our sample data using this class and referencing everything for our previews. Inside the do block, we're going to call a method called load sample moments, and then we create a method here called private func load sample moments, and we're going to say for moment in moment.sampleData. We're going to say context.insert moment. So again, remember when you're working with static data, you don't create an instance of the moment class. You reference moment with a capital M, and you reference the class directly, and you say sample data, and so that is accessible right there. So now when this container gets created, it's going to load some sample moments for us. Next, we want to add some conditional items here so that because we're creating this class, we want it to work for the previews, but also for the application itself. So if we're using a preview, then we load the sample data. If we're using it in an application running in the simulator or on your device, you want it to not load sample data. You want it to be fresh database. So in our init, we're going to pass in a variable that says include sample moments and set that as a Boolean, and we're going to default to false. And then in our conditional, we're going to say on is stored in memory only, pass in the include sample moments variable. So when it comes through as false, it will not include it in memory. It'll load from device. But when we're in the preview, we will pass in true, which will then load it in memory only. And then finally, if we're going to say if include sample moments, then we're going to load sample moments. Otherwise, it'll skip that step. Now we want to add a few things to make this a little more easier to work with in our SwiftUI views. So go ahead and say import SwiftUI. We want to set this, use the macro main actor. Whoops, at main actor. Remember, when you have, when you're using concurrency, meaning things are running in the background, you want this to update on the main actor, which is where all the UI is managed. So whenever we're doing asynchronous things in SwiftUI, it has to be on the main actor. We're going to now create a sample container object and create an extension so that we can reference this in SwiftUI. So go ahead and underneath the class, we're going to say private let sample container equal data container include sample moments true. And then we're going to say extension view function sample data container, and it's going to return some view, some view, and it's going to be self and then dot model container. Whoops, sorry, I'm typing and talking here. Model container, and then it's going to return the sample container dot model container. So what this is doing is setting it up so that all of the SwiftUI views have access to this sample data because of this extension. That way we don't have to go into every view and update this model container in order to have it load all of this. So it's a helper function that makes it much easier, so we don't have to update every preview to have access to this container that has the sample data. We do need to make this observable, so we can add another macro at the top at observable, and then we need to pass this into the environment. So we say environment sample, hold on, environment sample container. So now this is available throughout the SwiftUI classes because we've set it as an environment variable. Finally, we need to pass this in starting at the Grateful Moments app.swift. So at this level, we say import SwiftData. And remember, this is the entry point for the application, so that we're saying, okay, now we have a data container. So we're going to say let data container equal data container. And then in the content view, we pass in the environment data container. And then on the window group, we have model container is data container model container. So now this is accessible throughout our application because we've set up the SwiftData so that they can access the container, and then they can access everything associated with that. Let's go back to our moments entry view. And we want to create, we need to reference the environment. So we want an environment variable to reference the container. So we're going to say at environment, and then it's going to be data container dot self, and it's going to be a private var data container. And then to fix this crashing, we need to add it to our preview, and we say dot sample. Come on, stop it. Sample data container. And so now the preview will stop crashing, and now we can reference that. In this view, this shows up when the user goes to create a new moment. And we want to add some toolbar with buttons that allows them to save or cancel the action. So up here under the scroll view, below the navigation title, we're going to say dot toolbar. And then we want a toolbar item. And it's going to be placed dot confirmation action. And then remember, press return. Now we have our code block. And inside that, we want to create a button. And it's going to be a button that says add, and it's going to be system image check mark. And we need the closure. There we go. Okay, so we've added a toolbar, and we've placed it in the confirmation action, which is up in the upper right corner. And we've used a button, and it is a check mark. And remember, we've got the tint automatically set because we changed our accent color to Ember. So that's the theme of the colors for this app. So now we have this button there. When they click the check mark, the add button, we want to create a moment. So we're going to say let new moment equals moment. And we're going to say, whoops, not that. We're going to say title is title. And then note is equal to note. Image data is going to be image data. And then timestamp is going to be .now. So we've created a moment. Oh, and then we need to close this. Sorry, we need a parentheses. Parentheses. Like that. Like that. Okay. So now we've created a moment. Now let's save this. So we're going to reference our data container. Dot context dot insert new moment. And then we're going to attempt to save it by doing a do catch block. So in this block, it's going to say try data container dot context dot save. And then we're going to call dismiss. Now this is not going to work yet because we have to add it. But then we want to catch. And then here we're going to say don't dismiss. Okay, you remember from previous videos, there's a variable, there is a environment variable called dismiss that handles closing or dismissing these things for us. So we say at environment, and it's \dismiss. Boy, my spelling is having a fun time today. Private var dismiss. So this environment macro creates, come on, dismiss. What we're doing is now we have a reference to that. Come on, come on. Oh yeah, we need, what do we need? We're missing SwiftData. That's right. import SwiftData. Okay, so what we've done is we've created a button, an action button that is to add a moment. So which creates a new moment, and then it saves it to our container, which is the data container in the context. And then we call save, but it's asynchronous because it's possible that it could fail. But we do a do catch. And so if it saves, then we go ahead and dismiss this. And then if not, we don't dismiss it. One thing we mentioned here in the title, it says required. So in order for this to be enforced, we want to disable this button if the title is empty. So we're going to say disabled title.is empty. So that way they can't save it if the title is empty, because remember, title is required. Now we want to add a cancel button. And in order to do that, we're going to create a state variable so that we can keep track of whether we are showing a cancellation or not. So we're going to say @state private var is showing cancel confirmation, and that's going to be equal to false. So then we create another toolbar, and we can create it here above the button here. So we're going to say toolbar item, and its placement is going to be dot cancellation action. And I press tab, and I press return, and now I have my code block, and we want a button that is a cancel button, and its system image is going to be X mark. And then we have in our button, we say is showing cancel confirmation equals true. The reason we're doing this is because you always want to give people an option to confirm whether they're canceling something, because they're going to lose the data that they've entered. And it's important that it's best practice to really allow the user to be aware that, oh, we're going to delete this, so you're not going to be able to get it back. And so if they've typed a whole bunch of stuff and they accidentally click cancel, they need to know that, hey, this is permanent, so are you sure? That sort of thing. So that's why we're referencing is showing cancel confirmation. So now we're doing that. Now we can give a cancellation confirmation dialog. And so at the button, there's a modifier that says confirmation dialog. And the title is going to be discard moment. And then when we say is presented, we're binding it to the variable that we created, which is called is showing cancel confirmation. And then in the closure, we're going to have a button called discard moment. And then also we're passing a role, which is destructive. And I'll show you what this means in a second. But here we've got a button that's presented, and then the confirmation dialog is the discard moment. And when the role is set as destructive, then the button will look like and show red, or it'll have a highlighted. And so you'll notice the difference here in a second. So we can then click dismiss. We'll call dismiss when they press the button. We want to make this a little clearer so that we embed this. We only dismiss if title.isEmpty, note.isEmpty, image data is equal to nil. Then we dismiss. Otherwise, we say is showing cancel confirmation equals true. So the action only happens when there's something to destroy, there's something to dismiss, to delete. So notice here, right now, when we have this button, it says discard moment, and notice that it's highlighted red. That's the role.destructive. That's what that means. But because this view is not being presented by anything right now, there's nothing for it to do, so it's not going to, there's nothing to dismiss. In the next video, we will put this in place with the other screens. All right, so what we've done now is set up for the application. We've got the moments view, which allows them to create a moment, and then we've set up our data container with sample data, as well as the default setup for saving to the SwiftData on the device. And that's everything for this video. So let's go ahead and check our understanding. Take a look at the tutorial. Scroll down here. Let's see what we've learned. How does Photos Picker give access to selected photos? Load transferable, SwiftUI image view, UI image. So that's a good question. So give access to selected photos. Yeah, I mean, load transferable is the method that we use. Let's see. Yep, load transferable lets you transfer selected photos in a supported format. When applied to optional, what does flat map do? Transforms the value if the value is non-optional, unwraps the optional, transforms the value, transforms the value. So we transform the value if it's non-optional. All right. Extracting content out of a SwiftUI's body gives which benefit? Performance, clarity, limited. It's the clarity and better readability. Awesome. All right, great job. So be sure to subscribe and like and share with your friends and neighbors and enemies. And be on the lookout for the next video as we continue building this application.